All right. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started. Over the last few weeks, we've been rotating through the topics of estate planning and how it relates to tax planning, asset protection, business planning. Today, we've revisited the conversation related to legacy planning. And in the past, we've touched on the recipe to leave a legacy from one generation to the next. Today, we're going to talk about ethical wills. A lot of times we hear these words that, reflect, for example, last will and testament, a living will, a loving will, an ethical will, all these words. And sometimes they just kind of get meshed and mixed up in our minds because for the majority of us, these words don't really mean a lot. They're specific, what we call terms of art, right? And so within the estate planning world, they mean something very specific. But to the average person, they don't really mean much at all. But it's important to understand the difference in the uses for each of these tools. And so, when you hear the term loving will or ethical will, basically the idea of this is to leave an expression of your values, your heartfelt statements and intentions for your loved ones. And the idea of doing this is that it's not necessarily a legal document that has to be followed, but it's a document that helps to provide insight for your loved ones on what your belief system was and what's important to you and how you want to be remembered. When we talk about leaving a legacy, a legacy can take many forms. It doesn't have to be purely financial. It doesn't have to be pure assets. And because of that, sometimes we overlook the possibilities that we have to be able to transfer other things, including those expressions of your values and sentiments. But if you want to include that as part of your plan, as part of your estate plan, your will, your trust, or a more comprehensive plan, the way that we do it is in the form of a letter or a statement. And that statement basically says, here's the essence of who I am, and here are the things that are important to me to pass on to posterity, right? So, the starting point for this would be to imagine yourself thinking, okay, you have friends, family, loved ones that you're going to leave behind, possibly. And the question is, if you had, a minute, 5 minutes to have a final conversation with them and share with them the things that are most important, most heartfelt to you, the things that you would want them to know and to think through and to realize, in your absence, what are those things? What are the core most important values that you hold that, for me, my kids are all young, right? The oldest one's 9 years old, right? And so if I were to pass away tomorrow, what are the things that I would want my kids to remember about me? What are the things that I would want them to know about the men and women that I would want them to grow into? What are the things that I would want to really leave as an expression, not just of my love, but also of guidance, of what's important for our family in my absence? And those are the things that we would write into the concept of an ethical will. And by putting this in writing, not only does it guarantee that somebody's going to be able to look at it and be aware of it at some point in the future, but it also is a process that I think is somewhat cathartic. It helps us to realize more about ourselves, and it helps us to be able to maybe appreciate the moment a little bit more, right? So as part of your estate plan, the concept is to think through, okay, what if I wasn't around? What are the things that would be important for me to share, for me to be able to express? Maybe the things that went unsaid, maybe the things that are important for your family to, be aware of, or those, secrets that are passed on from generation to generation, right? Words of wisdom. I just saw Sonic 2 with my kids last week. And there was this one moment in the movie, for anybody who's watched the movie, right, where Sonic says, "Oh, that was awesome. Was that, a quote that you took from Oprah?" and the other character says, "Oh no, that's a family, special, right? That's been passed on from my father to me, from my grandfather to my father, right? And I'm passing it on to you," sort of thing. And all of us have those sort of things, whether they're family recipes, whether they're memories, maybe they're specific phrases or ways of doing things, mottos, that sort of thing. And if we want to preserve that and pass that on to the next generation, that can happen informally in our daily conversations, in our daily dealings. But it can also be built into your long-term legacy plan. And you can put it in writing. You could put it into a video form, right? We have another method of doing that. There's lots of methods to be able to transfer that. And then once it's passed on, then the idea is, okay, well, what's the point of that? And for a proper legacy plan to really function the way that you want it to, you don't just want to have these expressions that are shared, because then that goes into, the family's gee whiz file. That's fun. That's cool. I'm glad Dad left this for us, right? But it also should tie into the overall plan and vision for what you want your legacy to be. So if you're a business owner, for example, there are some of these things that you may want to leave as the reflection of how business is done, how your business should run itself, what's important for your brand, for your business to continue, and build that into your legacy plan for your business. Leave these statements, leave these wishes, and leave it for the important people who are going to continue after you're gone, so that they can then run business the way you want business to be run. For your family, it's the same sort of thing, right? Especially if your kids are young and you might not have the opportunity to really share and express all of these desires. How do we leave that so that we can, allow them to understand when they're older and more mature what you wanted for them? And then build that into the plan, right? Maybe education is important to you. So we build the guidelines into your trust to say, okay, your revocable living trust is going to provide educational funds for your kids to be able to study, for them to be able to get a proper education, to be able to graduate, to be successful. And along with that, you have your expressions of heartfelt sentiments, values, what's important to you and what should be important to them. What are some of the life lessons that you want them to learn or to be aware of? And we build that in. Now, one of the really interesting things about today's world is that technology is changing so quickly that these statements, in the past, you write a letter, you leave that letter somewhere where it can be found after you're gone. That's easy enough, right? But in today's world, your digital persona can live on far after you're gone. And you can decide whether you want that digital persona to continue or to be, turned off, right? You can also decide how much of, these sort of things happen automatically. So just imagine setting up not just an ethical will that would say, these are things that are important to me, but what if you automated an email that goes to your loved ones every year that says, this is your life lesson for this year, right? And then they receive that email on their birthday. Maybe more meaningful. Maybe something that's more impactful. Maybe something that, would make a little bit more of a difference. What if, in today's world, again, things are changing so quickly. We're currently looking at options for, building estate plans on blockchain. And what's called a smart contract, right? Where you can automatically set up specific conditions. And when those conditions are met, then it triggers something to happen, right? And so what if you set up these expressions of values or of, sentiments that automatically get triggered when certain conditions are met? So there's all kinds of things that can be built into your legacy plan. And the concept is to really think through the essence of who you are and what's important to you. Because then those are the things that you're going to want to share as part of your legacy and to be able to transfer for purposes of really making a difference for the next generation. A lot of us have never taken the time to really sit down and reflect on that for ourselves. And whether you're successful or not successful doesn't really make a difference, because those that you leave behind are going to place some value on what they receive from you regardless, right? It's more about the relationships than it is about anything else. And so I think this is a really meaningful way that all of us can implement as part of our planning to make your estate plan, whether it's as simple as powers of attorney or a will, or maybe it's complex and you have multiple trusts and you have, millions of dollars that are going to be left, and you want to, give a framework for why things are being left that way. Either way, these expressions sometimes can be a lot more valuable than anything else that's left. And the theatrics of how you leave it, of how it's delivered to them, and how they receive it, I think is a very important consideration. So one of the things that we do when we do planning is we have a digital platform now that we can actually specify who receives what files, what information, what documents after you pass away. So if you left a specific, letter to your family, and this letter's only supposed to be read after you pass away, or in the case of your passing, maybe on a specific trigger, we can actually leave that in a secure online cloud-based portal, and then we can trigger it so that, certain individuals would receive notice that it exists and be able to receive it. And then when they receive it, then obviously read through it, or they can, have access to it. And that's just, part of the planning process when we go through this legacy plan. And a lot of times, people have just never taken the time to sit down and think, okay, this is a really meaningful way that all of us can implement as part of our planning to make your estate plan, whether it's as simple as powers of attorney or a will, or maybe it's complex and you have multiple trusts and you have, millions of dollars that are going to be left, and you want to, give a framework for why things are being left that way. Either way, these expressions sometimes can be a lot more valuable than anything else that's left. And the theatrics of how you leave it, of how it's delivered to them, and how they receive it, I think is a very important consideration. So one of the things that we do when we do planning is we have a digital platform now that we can actually specify who receives what files, what information, what documents after you pass away. So if you left a specific, letter to your family, and this letter's only supposed to be read after you pass away, or in the case of, your passing, maybe on a specific trigger, we can actually leave that in a secure online cloud-based portal, and then we can trigger it so that, certain individuals would receive notice that it exists and be able to receive it. And then when they receive it, then obviously read through it, or they can, have access to it. And that's just, part of the planning process when we go through this legacy plan. And a lot of times, people have just never taken the time to sit down and think, okay, what are some of the things that I would want these expressions of love, of caring, of values to include? So I invite all of us, let's sit down, think through for your life, what's meaningful to you? What are some of the things that have gone unsaid? What are some of the things that you would want to transfer? What are some of the things that would give more meaning to, the planning process of leaving behind assets or expressions to the next generation? And then, sit down, put that on paper, and on a very simple level, you might just write it out and keep it in a drawer. But when you get to the point where you're going to meet with legal counsel to help you with your estate plan, make sure that this is part of the conversation. And I think that it will really help to provide more meaning and insight to the planning process. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and open it up. I don't know whether we have anybody who's listening that has some questions, but if you do, feel free to send in a message or raise your hand, and we'll see if we can unmute you, and then we'll just kind of go from there. Any questions on today's topic? All right, so we do have one question that came in. This question is, if you have, multiple individuals, like maybe, parents and children, and you want to leave them different things, then is there a way to do that? And the answer is yes, and it just depends on, how you go about doing it. If you're going to set up something, physical, tangible, right? Then we may want to consider, okay, how's that access going to be given? Maybe we have a sealed letter with their name on it, and we leave it for the trustee to deliver. Or maybe we have a secured, safety deposit box with specific information or specific items that need to go to a specific person, and we leave that as part of the plan of what's going to be left to them as a specific distribution, right? Or on this digital platform I was talking about earlier, we can actually specify what items, what digital files are going to go to which individuals, and then that's delivered to them through an email sort of system, and they verify identity and so on to be able to get access. All right, any other questions? Perfect. Well, thanks for joining. Again, today we touched on legacy planning. We're rotating through a series of topics related to estate planning and different aspects of estate planning. And so next week we'll be circling back to basic estate planning. And we left off with that conversation related to planning around guardians for your children. This next time around, we're going to be talking about the difference between a will and a trust, and why and in which circumstances would it be more beneficial to have a trust over a will, and vice versa. So again, thanks for joining. As always, we have this recorded, and we'll have it available wherever you get your podcast, and also available on YouTube and on our websites. So feel free to follow, like, subscribe, and so on and so forth. And we'll look forward to talking with you all next week.